historian here tonight, and she is going to be talking to you about Downstairs at Downton. So I'm gonna not introduce too much because she knows much more than I do. So I'm gonna have us welcome Kathy Wilson.
All right, well, first, just to kind of give you a little bit of background, because for some reason people ask, are you really a historian? And it's like, yes, this is what I do for a living. I got my bachelor's from Bemidji State in Minnesota in history. And then I packed up and I moved to England for 2 years, where I did my master's at the University of York. And I came back about 12 years ago to do my PhD at the University of Iowa. My family has stopped asking when I'm going to finish, because the running joke has been, will you get done in time to file for Social Security? And that is looking like it's going to happen first. So that's my background. In my previous life, I was an archaeologist before I decided to go back to school. And so that was my first love. History has always been part of my life. Because I have parents who were great storytellers and an amazing grandmother who made me value all of my past, the good parts and the bad parts. And I think she would be really thrilled to know what I was doing today. One thing very important you need to know about me, and that is that I went through school being called Chatty Cathy for a reason. Some of you are old enough to remember the dolls with the string. I wanted one. She wouldn't let me have one because she said that was more than she could handle. So what that means for you is if you have questions, comments, random thoughts that you want to get out there, do not hesitate to interrupt me, because I am quite happy to stand here and listen to myself talk. And I don't think there's really much of anything worse than having to try and remember your question for 45 minutes. All right? So promise me you will all jump in if you have questions. This program is a little interactive. I'm going to ask you things, and I really want you to respond, okay? But it's not like school, so don't feel pressured. I was asked how I got into this particular program, and I have to tell you, it was an accident. Because I didn't watch the series when it came on. As a historian, one of the challenges we face is that it's very easy for us to get caught up in picking apart all the mistakes that they make. And so a lot of times I will just not watch them for that reason. And so I did not start watching Downton. I had been, however, doing a series of programs with my local library that we called Masterpiece Dinner and Discussion, where we were taking mini-series, things that were like 2 or 3 or 5 nights, and we did a dinner and a discussion led by an expert on that particular topic, and we did that for several years. And her patrons came to her and said, you know, Downton's going to be only on for one more season. How come you haven't done something? And I got a phone call, and she said, can you do this? And I said, no. I didn't watch the series. This is not my era. My specialty is 18th and 19th century British American history, not 20th century. Well, the woman that I suggested she asked could not do it, and I got another phone call, and she said, you can make this happen. So fortunately, I got the flu twice, and so I spent most of several weeks in January binge watching 5 seasons so that I could watch season 6 and do this program. And here we are today. So that's the story behind the scenes. Now, this is done in kind of 3 parts. First, I'm going to make you all country estate owners, because in order to appreciate what's going on downstairs, you also have to know about the challenges upstairs. Then we're going to look at life for servants kind of in general, and then we're going to look very particularly at the life of a servant downstairs. And we'll find out if you could survive as a domestic. So Here we go. All right, so there are several ways that you can get a country estate. Off the top of your head, what would those ways be? You can inherit it. What else?
Steal it. Buy it.
You could buy one, preferably not steal it. So you can inherit it, you can buy it.
Marry into it.
You could marry into it. And your fourth option would be to simply buy some land and build your own place that looks like it's several hundred years old, right? So you've got four main ways that you can get your hands on a country estate. Now, how are you going to afford to keep it? What would be the number one thing that you need to have in order to support a country house lifestyle? And where are you going to get it? Well, in Iowa, as in country estate ownership, if you want to be able to support your lifestyle, you need to have land, lots and lots of land. What's a large farm in Clay County?
They pay the rent for the land.
Well, even if you rent the land, what would be a large farm?
1,000 acres or 1,500 acres.
Are there farms that big in Clay County? That's amazing. Well, those are small potatoes, because a country estate was between 1,000 and 100,000 acres, and a large estate would be between 3 and 10,000 acres. So if you have anything more than 10,000 acres, well, that's beyond large. And to help you kind of put this into perspective, the largest landowner in Britain at the turn of the century was the Duke of Norfolk, and he owned 150,000 acres. 234 square miles is roughly half the size of Clay County. So if you can imagine one individual owning half of your county, that would be the Duke of Norfolk. Today, there are 5 people in Britain who own more than 50% of all rural land. The single wealthiest landowner is not the Crown. The Crown is actually number 4. The single individual is a Scottish duke, and he owns over 250,000 acres, making him the largest landowner in Europe. Now, you've got it, you've got land to make it pay. How are you going to lose it?
Bad management.
Bad management will get you every time. But your biggest challenge is going to be making sure you have income. That's why you have to have lots of acres. This causes a huge problem at the end of the 19th and the early part of the 20th century, because at the end of the 19th century, Parliament decided to open up British markets to cheap American grain. It drove the price of British products down so low that for the first year that this happened, farmers didn't even bother to harvest their crops. They left them rot in the field. Now, if you happen to own 50,000 acres and a good portion of that is under cultivation, and now you cannot grow crops because your crops can't compete price-wise, what happens to your income? Drops down, right? So what are you going to do to make sure that you keep your estate running? What's your only option? You start selling off the land. You've got to sell the land to keep that cash coming in. Well, if that wasn't bad enough, they also hit you with taxes. In England, you had to pay a death tax when you inherited your lovely property that was the equivalent to 33% of the assessed value of your property. Now, years ago, I was married to a farmer in Indiana, And the county that we lived in had the highest concentration of wealthy people in the state. You would never know it to drive around town because they looked just like everybody else. They were paper rich, but cash poor. And this is the problem that country estate owners also have. On paper, they are incredibly wealthy because they own huge tracts of land. They have no cash. So if you're struggling to make ends meet, and that is your situation, what do? You sell more land. Well, let's say you've sold all the land you can really afford to lose. You might do what the Earl did, right? Marry an heiress. The end of the 19th century marked the big transatlantic marriage movement, for lack of a better term, because you had all of these families with new money in America who had eligible daughters, and you had lots of British families who had plenty of land and titles and no cash. So let's make a deal. All right, so knowing those facts, do you have what it takes to run someplace like Highclere Castle, the real Downton Abbey? Now I want you to pay attention to this picture. This is the core domestic staff that was in place at Highclere Castle in about 1914. So we'll say on the eve of World War I. What do you notice about the people in this picture?
It's a lot more women than there are men.
Mostly women. How are they dressed? They're all not wearing the same clothes. Keep that in mind. That's very important. All right, so what is it going to cost you, realistically, to run your country house? The budget I'm going to show you is in pounds, and I will give you an exchange rate at the end of the list here. So, your biggest expense is going to be your personal expenses, your clothing, your entertainment, your holidays. If you go gambling, if you want to go shopping with your friends, all of those things constitute personal expenses. It might also include things like going to the dentist or going to the doctor or getting your eyeglasses. All of those things come under personal expenses. You also have to maintain your property, just like every homeowner does. However, unlike homeowners here in this room, if you're a country estate owner, you are also responsible for maintaining the villages located on your property. So that means you keep up the school, the church, the parsonage, most of the businesses in town, and most of the residents, because those residents are working for you. So in addition to your own private buildings, you're having to keep up all of those buildings as well. And if you own 150,000 acres, there are going to be quite a few villages on your property. You also have to keep your grounds up because your status is dependent a lot on your reputation. And part of what makes your reputation is your ability to entertain. And going hunting is a very large part of that entertainment. If your grounds are not well maintained and you don't have enough game or birds on your property, then you will take a nosedive in status. Of course, every family's got transportation costs to deal with, household supplies to buy, got to clean those bathrooms, and you have to pay those people downstairs something. And of course, there's that little entertainment business that I mentioned. So let's say that you live a modest lifestyle and you're going to only entertain small groups, maybe 5 or 6 times a year. A small group is about 30 or 40 people, okay, not 5 or 6. And All of this is going to cost you 20,000 pounds in about 1900. What is missing from this list besides taxes?
Food?
There's no food on this list. The one thing you don't have to worry about is your food, because you have tenant farmers, and your tenant farmers provide you with beef and pork and lamb and poultry and all of the other things you need, and you have massive gardens and wonderful orchards. And so the only food you're going to buy are going to be things for your entertainment events, right? So you're going to buy things like canned oysters or exotic fruits that have to be shipped in from somewhere else. And you're going to do it for the equivalent in 2015 of $3.2 million a year. Now, the estate for which this budget was drawn up was already running $1 million in debt each year in 1900. You can be sure that they are selling off land as quickly as possible. So, there was one thing that could take your already overextended budget and make it even worse. Can you think of what it might be? We don't have to deal with it here. There's your hint.
Real estate taxes?
Oh, everybody's got to pay lots of taxes. How about this? Okay, this is Bertie. This is Queen Victoria's eldest son, Albert, the Prince of Wales. He and Lord Carnarvon were very good friends, and he often visited Highclere Castle. And it would cost them roughly $500,000 to entertain the prince for a weekend. Well, why is that?
I have a question.
Ask away.
Back on that estimate.
Yes.
Is that for Highclere?
No, that was just an average estate. Yep. Yes, ma'am.
Those estates were that big. Great Britain, are we talking about England, or are we talking all of Scotland?
We're talking Britain in terms of, for the purposes of comparison to the program, we're talking England and Scotland.
Okay, so that took that isn't all that big.
No, it's not.
So then there were like 5 people that owned all the land? Or
Today there are 5 people that own they own more than 50% of the rural land in Britain and Scotland today.
so I was wondering about how many estates were there?
Well, I can tell you that towards the end of the 19th century, before income levels dropped so bad and people started having to sell things off, there were roughly 200 families that controlled most of the estates. And if you own several 100,000 acres between 200 families, that covers most of the island. So, why is it costing you so much to entertain the prince?
Because that's 2014.
Okay, I know, but they don't give me conversion rates any more recent than that at this point.
About 3,000 pounds. Was that in 1898?
This is in 1898.
And
They drank an awful lot of wine and brandy.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. If you invite the prince to your house, does he come by himself? No, he has an entourage, right? Royal people have groupies, to put it into everyday terms. When you invite a royal person to visit, he comes or she comes with a staff. He has his, or she has, right, either his valet or her lady's maid. He has secretaries and other support staff. She would come with her ladies in waiting. There are also all sorts of other aristocrats who cater to royal people. So you bring your groupies with you. And when they come, they bring their staff. So an outing with the prince for the weekend is probably going to involve, at a minimum, 30 or 40 people. And if it's a big weekend, maybe 100 people. And if that's not bad enough, well, let me ask you this. If you have somebody important come stay at your house, what do you do to get ready for them?
Well, one, the royals come with a big price tag for what they expect us to live in. I mean, it's not like you can just open up your guest.
Exactly. You can't just throw open the doors and put clean sheets on the bed, right? At Highclere Castle, when Bertie came to visit, they redecorated all of the apartments that His Royal Highness would use. His bedroom, his sitting room, his dressing room, his bathroom, and probably the rooms of his extended important group. That also means that when you redecorate, you aren't just buying new sheets and towels. You may replace all the furniture. You're going to redo the wallpapering. You're going to buy new carpets and put up new drapes. And all of a sudden, you have spent $500,000 to entertain the prince for a weekend. A royal visit was something that everyone dreaded for centuries. And you would get little notice in the past. A rider would come and he would tell you that the king was on his way to see you and he would be there in a fortnight. You have 2 weeks to prepare. If you are already running at a deficit, what is this going to do to you? Your status, your reputation depends how well you entertain the prince and his guests. When Bertie came to visit Highclere, this was the core staff that he would have encountered. A little different than that picture I pointed out at the beginning, right? So now what do you notice about this picture?
More men.
More men.
They're all dressed similar, more similar than they were in the first one.
Definitely more similar. Well, who's the most important person in this picture? Lady in the middle.
She runs the staff.
How do we know that?
Mrs. Hughes.
Mrs. Hughes. What, besides the fact that she's in the middle of the picture, what's the giveaway? She is dressed much nicer. What about the two ladies on either side of her?
Second in command.
They're dressed pretty nice too.
They're dressed pretty nice too. They're dressed nicer than the ladies behind, right? So these two are probably the ladies' maids, which means that the row of women behind are just your average maid. The ones that do all the super hard work, right?
Take it to the, okay.
Exactly. Okay, so now what about the guys? Well, let me ask you this. Who would be Barrows in this picture? Where would you find Barrows?
Was he the master's, who was?
No, that's Bates. Barrows is a first footman. So who in this picture would be the first footman?
Probably the one in the suit.
It's these guys right here. They're wearing what we call livery, only by 1900 it's more like evening formal wear, right? Double-breasted tails, very polished, and they all look very much alike, right? But then we have some odd guys. So look at this fellow.
He looks so much older than the others.
He does look a bit older.
Maybe the butler or the carriage driver or
Mr.
something.
Hughes. Or Mr.
You're thinking of Carson? I do not believe so. In fact, I do not believe there is a butler in this picture, which is kind of unusual. This fellow is probably the estate agent or the land agent. When you have thousands of acres, you need somebody who's going to run around and keep track of all your tenant farmers. So he's dressed professionally, but if you look at the cut and the quality of his suit, it's not nearly as nice as the guys in livery. So he's not hanging out in the house. What about the fellow behind him in the light colored suit?
It's like a driver.
No, well, actually, we'll tell you that the guy next to him is the driver. He's holding gloves. He is the gamekeeper. And even today, if you go to England or Scotland, gamekeepers wear light-colored tweed suits with a vest and +4s. Those are the pants that are baggy to the knees so that you can wear tall boots. And they dress just like that today.
And what's their job?
They are the ones who maintain the property. So they're going to make sure that that the forests are in good order, that the brush is kept manageable, that there are plenty of game birds on the property, deer if there are still deer. They may even manage stocking ponds and such in case fishing happens to be the master's preferred hobby. I love this little guy right here. He reminds me of a gnome.
Santa Claus.
Yeah, or Santa Claus. What do you think his job is?
I don't know, but do we have any clergy that's involved?
No, we have no clergy in the picture. No doctors, no professionals other than the land agent. This little fellow may be the head gardener, all dressed up for the picture. This man next to him, I think, may be a valet. It's hard to tell because he has something here on his waist that I can't tell exactly what it is. Don't think it's his arm because his arm goes back here. And this guy, I can't tell, or this one either. This one may be also a second footman or also be affiliated with, the coach or carriage. And then there's this guy. We always think that he looks like he has a mullet because of the curtain behind him.
Oh, I see, yeah.
Is that a dog?
Is that a dog?
Is
Yeah,
that a
and then the
dog?
big one, now would that be theirs?
How many dogs are in this picture?
Two.
Three.
Three.
There's a black one in the
Black one
center.
All right, so there's the collie, right? Collie. This is a pug, 2. There's a cocker spaniel hiding down here by her skirt. That's 3. And she's holding a Yorkie. So what does it tell you about the pets and the staff? The fact that they're in a formal picture together, what does that tell you?
They're equal.
They're equals.
Oh.
Now, I want to go back to this discussion about how these people look and why this is important. Before about 1880, this was how most women dressed to do domestic work. You made your own clothes. You could show your own personality in the style and the trim. And they all would look very different. Now, if you happen to be a middle-class household who has only 1 or 2 or at most maybe 3 hired girls, this is not a problem. You know who they are. But if you have a staff of 40 or 50 men and women working in your house, if they are all dressed differently, can you see where this might create a problem? One of the things that Americans don't really quite understand is that Britain doesn't have a class system. They have a social order. America has a class system. The upper class, the middle class, and the working class. That's not the way that British society is structured. British society is structured like a ladder, and the monarch is at the top, And it goes all the way down to the lowest, poorest person living in the street. And everybody has a rung on that ladder. The monarch was followed by the aristocrats, who were followed by the gentry, who own land, the lesser gentry, who are professionals like doctors and lawyers and larger farmers. And then there's the kind of the middling sorts, the merchants, the storekeepers, the shopkeepers, and below them are domestic workers, rural agricultural workers, and factory workers. And within each of those different layers, there's even more hierarchy. So if you remember from the show, there are different times where some of the footmen complained to Carson that another footman is trying to take over his responsibilities. Because there is such a stratified social order, people jealously guard their position in society. If everyone is dressed differently, it's hard to know at a glance what your position is. So, by dressing people in a uniform manner, you know at a glance what that person's job is, where they're supposed to be, and what they're supposed to be doing. You don't have to know their name. You don't have to get to know them. It made life much simpler for the wealthy to do it this way. All right, let's put you to work. Now, ladies, I have a question for you. When you were at Highclere, how much of the castle did you get to see?
Hardly any of it.
Hardly any of it.
Downstairs or the first floor pretty much, and then some of the bedrooms that they had videoed out of,
Okay.
see, and then we got to go downstairs.
Do they take you into like the areas where they still have repair issues, where things need to be redone, so you don't get to see any of that?
To us about that, and we did not get into the private areas where the carnivans.
Yeah.
Well, actually, they live in another house now.
Yeah.
They spend most of their time, they spend most of their time in a separate house, but they do still spend time in the castle. Right? All right, so if these lovely ladies had had a chance to wander through the entirety of Highclere Castle, they would have covered about 30,000 square feet. And in that 30,000 square feet, they think, according to what Lady Carnarvon has figured out, they think there were between 250 and 300 bedrooms. And the experts who know how these things are supposed to work think that for that many bedrooms, there had to be between 20 and 25 bathrooms. Now, most of us don't need anywhere near that much space. But if you have a royal visitor and all of his or her entourage, you need all those spaces. So you aren't going to be cleaning them on a daily basis. Once they're clean, you cover everything with sheets, just like they do in the movies, and you leave it until it's time for it to be used. So, to give you an idea, though, about the workload that a place of that size will generate, I'm taking you to a place in Wales called Earl. Square footage-wise, it's probably about the same as Highclere Castle. It's just configured a little differently. And in the 1890s, so about the time that the prince was there, here's what your workload would look like. They generated 2 tons of laundry, which could be as many or more than 600 pieces, from handkerchiefs to huge tablecloths. They went through 3 tons of coal in 50 fireplaces. Think about that, 50 fireplaces. 5 ovens and 3 huge copper boilers where they heat the water. And they need at least 300 gallons of water for cooking and cleaning and to keep those boilers filled. In what period of time do you think this was generated? Day, a week, a month, a year?
Probably a week, yeah.
A week. And on top of that, the cook had to prepare 4 meals a day for 30 people, more or less. That doesn't include the staff.
4 meals, what, breakfast?
Breakfast, lunch, dinner, and tea. Because tea,
No, they had twice, didn't they have tea twice a day?
well, they have tea, morning tea and tea with lunch, and tea, you can have tea whenever you want to. But tea as a meal was the 4th meal of the day, because you're going to have that late in the afternoon to tide you over until dinner at 8 o'clock. So you're having 4 meals. So, who are you going to hire to run your country estate? You're probably going to have a land agent if you have any sort of sizable acreage. And if you have a large staff, like at Highclere, you're going to want to have a house steward, because that way then you have someone who oversees all of your inside employees. You're also going to be sure to have the important staff, right? A butler, a housekeeper, a chef, a cook, a valet, a lady's maid, and if you have children, you need a governess or a tutor to look after them. Now, notice I said chef and cook. At Downton Abbey, we only ever saw Mrs. Patmore. But for a family of that status, they would have, at least on occasion, hired a chef as well. The chef is always going to be a man, and he's always going to be French. And if he isn't French, he knows how to cook French. A cook is always going to be a woman, and she's always going to be the same cultural affiliation as the estate owner. So if you're English, you have an English cook. If you're Scots, you have a Scots cook, okay? But then you get to pick from all these other people that we don't really ever see at Downton Abbey. Are there any job descriptions on here that are unfamiliar to you?
Hall boy.
Hall boy, his job is to keep the servants' quarters and the servants' dining room in order.
Really?
And the lamp boy, was he to keep the things clean?
His sole purpose was to go through the entire house regularly to make sure all the lamps are filled and the chimneys are cleaned and the wicks are trimmed. And if you have 200 rooms, that could take you a long time. Well, I will tell you my favorite job on here is this one, the still room maid. I'm thinking, I know what a still is. This could be a pretty cushy job. I'm just going to sit here and taste test whatever's being made, right? I was disappointed. No, they're not making any sort of alcohol beverages in that room. But they do make dessert. And so I decided I definitely wanted that job. All right, to give you an idea how many people you're going to hire, this is the list of indoor staff at Longleat Estate near Bath. Lady Daphne Fielding and her husband and their 5 children lived here in 1905, and they had 43 indoor servants. That does not count all the people working outside on the property. So she's running a company here, basically. And she's got a pretty diverse group of people.
What's the admin?
Today we would call, I know, that's everybody's reaction. Well, you know, I could go there. We have the equivalent of odd men today, only that's not what we call them. We call them handymen. They do odd jobs. The equivalent of the handyman is the daily woman. They're casual workers who work when and where you need them.
So why are they calling them vegetable maid and?
Because that is all she does. From the time she finishes breakfast in the morning is that she collects and prepares all the vegetables that the cook will need to serve the family meals.
So why are they called maids and not cooks?
Because they're not cooks, they're maids. The cook is a status unto itself, which is why Mrs. Patmore is called Mrs. Patmore. She was never married, neither was Mrs. Hughes. In both cases, Mrs. is given as a title of respect. So if everybody's a cook, then being a cook does not give you status. So this is about maintaining that hierarchy. So you strive to be the cook, you strive to be the housekeeper, and everybody below them is a maid. So it doesn't matter what your job is.
You don't have a cook on that.
We do. They have just a chef. They don't have, it would be a man.
So he wouldn't be called Mrs.
No, he would be called Mr. Unlike the butler, who's going to be simply called Carson.
The scullery maid, is that one that does all the pots and pans?
She's got the nastiest job in the kitchen. She's the youngest woman or girl on staff, and she does all the pots and pans. And that's all. She does the pots and pans, scrubs the kitchen floor, scrubs the stoves, and tries to keep ahead of the cook or the chef.
That little gal, I think she was Daisy?
Daisy would have started as a scullery maid, and then she would have worked her way up to a vegetable maid or a kitchen maid. She might have even started as a between maid, which nobody commented on the page before. A between maid was a young girl who had no experience, who was hired to help learn, and she had to learn all of the jobs in the kitchen. But if they needed her upstairs, she would go upstairs and help the parlor maids, the chamber maids. And so she existed in a space between floors. And that's why they called her a between
What
maid.
is an under butler?
He would be like the butler's assistant. So he's above the first footman, but he's not as powerful as a full-blown butler.
And the valet, what did he actually do?
He's the guy who helps the master dress. Yes.
But then the butler, he's the one that,
He runs the house. He runs the house.
The house steward, is he
The house steward is the fellow who oversees all of the staff.
who would come to the door?
The butler would come to the door.
okay.
All right, now that you know what you're facing, can you survive as hired help? In 1901, the majority of women who worked in domestic service. And what I want you to notice here is the age at which they start counting domestic workers. 40% of them are working in private service or domestic service. Men, the same thing. Starting at the age of 10, they start counting you, and the majority of them are in private service as well. Ladies, if you were going into domestic service, you started working about 2 years before you actually started working, because you had to earn enough money to buy all the materials necessary to make all of your clothes. So when you showed up to work at the big house, you had a trunk that had everything from the caps on your head to your socks, everything underneath and above your clothing. It takes a long time to earn that kind of money and make your clothes. Gentlemen, if you were tall and good looking, you got a bonus. And your uniforms were also provided for you. Does that seem fair? There is a reason. First of all, because the men are standing around looking good, you want them all to look the same. And ladies, because you get your first corset at the age of 6, All of your clothes have to be custom made to fit your body. So you can't just go down and buy them off the rack. Here's your pay. An average housemaid made about $2,500 a year. In 2015, the poverty line was about $13,500. Some did better. If you're a butler, you could make almost $10,000 a year. The chef, he's really living high on the hog at 12. And the cook, because she's a woman, even though she's cooking more than the chef, gets about half. But you could be the scullery maid. She doesn't even make $2,000 a year. And to put it into even more stark terms, you're working 17 hours a day, 6 3/4 days a week, 52 weeks a year.
That's what blew my mind. 6, yeah.
Yeah. You get just enough time off on Sunday to go to church and maybe go for a walk, and then you're expected to be back in the house ready to go back to work. No. No vacations, no holidays, no paid time off.
How did families ever come together?
There are no families. That is the issue. If you go into domestic service, that becomes your life. If you happen to live close to the village where you were born and raised, you would see your family after church on Sunday or in church on Sunday. But the majority of people who go into domestic service are coming from more metropolitan areas. Their families are scattered all over town, and they may go to work for a country house that's 30 miles away. So there would be no seeing them. To make it make more sense, the chef, even though he's making lots of money, is making an average of $2.14 an hour, and the scullery maid is making about 32 cents an hour. And I'd be hard-pressed to find anybody in this room who could live on either end of that scale.
How much is a loaf of bread, though?
Well, you don't have to buy bread.
No, but for 32, I mean,
How far does the money?
How far does the money go? Well, I can't answer your question directly, but I will answer it this way. The reason that so many people are sent into domestic service as opposed to working in other jobs is because it is the best paying, safest, healthiest job you can get. Those who go into service come from poor working class families, usually large ones. And children are put to work as soon as they are able to earn a penny. When you are put into domestic service, it is with the understanding that you are sending home the money that you get paid. So the more children you can put into domestic service, the better off mom and dad and the kids at home will be. Yes, ma'am.
Do they live in the home
They live in the home,
so they don't have to pay housing, they don't have to pay food,
correct?
only their clothes?
Only their clothing. But there is also no insurance, there is no sick pay, there's no retirement plan, there is no unemployment insurance. So if something happens to you, let's say you're Mrs. Patmore and you're losing your sight because you have cataracts. What happens to you when you can no longer see to cook?
Get fired.
You get fired. Then what happens?
you can't get another job.
You can't get another job. Where do you go? What do you do? You better have family who will take you in somewhere, because that's your only recourse, otherwise you're homeless. So even though you have a roof over your head and you're getting 3 square meals a day, that's why parents want their kids to go into domestic service. They're safe, they're healthy, their life expectancy is almost twice as long as family members who are working in factories. So you make the money, you're living comfortably, you're well taken care of. As long as you do your job, you're set. You send all of that cash home to help take care of your family. maybe you squirrel a little bit of it away. Maybe if you're Mrs. Patmore and you really only have one other family member, you save your money so that you can do something when you retire. Because when your job is done, you do not get a cottage on the estate. The only people who lucked out and had that happen were retired nurses, not medical nurses, nurses who take care of the children. Because the children had such strong attachments to that particular woman that when they were all grown and gone and their children were raised and there was no job for her, they might put her in a cottage on the estate. Everybody else was thanked for their service and shown to the door.
No, royalty.
So we were talking about upstairs, downstairs. Margaret Powell was the woman whose memoirs, she was the first person to really write about life below stairs. They were the basis for the program that aired on PBS back in the 70s called Upstairs, Downstairs. She reports that she did not want to go into domestic service. Her mother gave her an option. She said, if you can get a job and keep it, no problem. She was fired from 3 jobs in 3 years, and Mom said, that's it. She got her a position in a big house, and up the hill she went. They showed her to her room, which she shared with 2 other young maids. When she came back downstairs, they said, we'll have tea and we'll tell you what you're going to do. They gave her a list, she said, and she says, when I looked at the list, I thought they'd made a mistake. I thought this was for 6 people to do. Their schedule is so regimented. From the moment they get out of bed until they go to bed, their days are divided into 30-minute increments. And everyone knows where they're supposed to be at any given time. There's no free time. There's no time for socializing. You work from the moment your feet hit the floor. The scullery maid was the first woman up at 5 a.m., and the butler was the last one to bed. And that could be whenever his master decided to call it a night. He and the senior staff had to stay on duty until they were dismissed, when the family didn't need them anymore. Now, if the butler happened to work for a young single gentleman, he might be up until 2 or 3 in the morning or whenever the master came home. He would be expected to be at the door to let him in. Nobody goes to bed until the butler says it's okay. And there are rules to make sure that you do exactly those things. Most of them are full of common sense, things that you would practice in that sort of a household. Right? Don't yell back and forth in the rooms. Don't whistle while you work. Keep the doors closed beyond time, so on and so forth. Always give room if you meet one of your employers or betters on the stairs. What does it mean to give room?
Stand aside.
Move to the side.
If only it was that simple. Not only are you supposed to step back or step aside, you're supposed to turn and face the wall. And you are to do that to spare your betters from embarrassment. Because if they had to make eye contact with you, it would force them to acknowledge your presence, and even worse, they might have to ask you what you're doing there. Now, this would not be an embarrassment to you, this would be an embarrassment to them, because you are forcing them to interact with you. So when you give way, you're supposed to become invisible. Miss a meal? You're out of luck, because you can't go to the kitchen, fix a tray, and take it to your room. If you do that, that's theft, and you'll be dismissed. Ladies, if you happen to be going from one place to another, and some fine-looking young footman stops and bars your way in the hallway and tries to chat you up, and the housekeeper or the butler catches you, you could be dismissed on the spot for fraternizing with a member of the opposite sex. Notice, you get dismissed. He gets reprimanded and sent back to work. And that's because the wealthy still believed that lower class women would lead men to ruin because they were inherently wicked. Everybody's comings and goings is controlled. But by 1900, this changes. People were already getting tired of the way that they were being treated, and they were leaving the service, at least 5,000 to 6,000 people a year. But when war breaks out, over 400,000 servants leave domestic work all at once, because just like in this country in the 1940s, they want to do their bit for the cause. Well, this is a problem because estate owners, upper class and aristocratic estate owners, expect all the work to get done, but they have a staff shortage now. So what do? They go out and they hire more boys, more girls, and all the retired folks they can find to come in and pick up the slack. And the problem is they expect it to be the same quantity and quality. Now, to help put this into perspective, if for some reason most of the staff here at the library left, and it was just poor Robin and the director, and she only can hire, the only option for new employees is for her to go over to the grade school and hire 6th graders, how well do you think things are going to run here? Okay, that's the kind of setup we're talking about here. The only ones who really come out pretty good are the young wealthy men who go off to service, because they get to take their valets with them, because heaven forbid they have to wash and shave and dress themselves. That was the valet's job, was to keep his master's tent tidy and his uniforms clean, and help him bathe when they could and make sure he was shaved regularly. And I don't know who I'd be more embarrassed for, the young man who brought his valet or the poor valet who has to go with him. But for ladies, just like in this country in the 40s, this becomes a real break for them, because munition plant owners can't hire enough former maids. They want everyone that comes in to town to work in the munitions plant. Can you think of any reasons why that might be the case?
You're used to long hours and low pay.
Long hours, they're used to working long hours, very regimented long hours, low pay. Can you think of any other reasons?
No family.
There's no family to worry about. They're going to do their job and be there on time, right? The one big thing that they liked the most about former maids was that they were neat, clean, and tidy. They're used to wearing their hair up. They're used to bathing regularly. They keep their hands clean, their nails trimmed. And if you're working with explosives, this is very important. Well, they love this shorter hours, better pay. They get time off. They get to have a life. What's not to like? When the war's over, nobody wants to go back to domestic service. They've been working 17 hours a week. Now they're working, or 17 hours a day. Now they're working maybe 10 hours a day. And they get weekends, time on the weekends off. With the number of soldiers coming back and the number of displaced domestic workers, there is an employment issue. And that domestic servant shortage is made worse when in 1921 the British Crown implements unemployment insurance for the first time. So now, if you lose your job because the soldier has come home and wants his job back, you can go file for unemployment insurance. This goes over like a lead balloon, and wealthy estate owners start a letter writing campaign to Parliament. And they complain about workers being lazy and unappreciative, and that they would rather take a handout than come and do an honest day's work. Well, Parliament doesn't act on it. Former domestic workers now know that there is a whole world out there with jobs that they can go and do. And there are girls who have entered the workforce who never did domestic work. There's no reason for them to start doing it now. Well, by 1930, domestic labor and domestic service had changed dramatically. And this is part of the reason why the show had to end when it did. Like I just finished saying, servants no longer are willing to tolerate incredibly long hours, no time off, bad pay. They want to have a life. As I said, girls don't want to go do domestic work. They've seen that there's another world out there. They can go be nurses, school teachers, clerks, telephone operators. The sky is the limit for many of them. And this is where it starts to get dicey for those folks out there on the estates. If you have this big, huge house and you only have maybe a third of the staff that you had just 5 years prior, what are you going to do? Well, if you remember in the last series, the Earl and his family go down the road to an estate sale because their friends there are now forced to sell off the house and all of its contents because they've sold off all the land they can sell. Barrows goes looking for a job as a butler somewhere, and he goes to interview at an estate. And you see as he comes in, there are pictures missing off the wall and the carpets are gone. And he asks the gentleman of the house, "So how big is your staff?" And the man says, "You're it." Right? There's only so much you can do when you don't have the manpower. And you can only sell off so much land. To make things worse, when the war was over, the crown was left with a huge war debt. And they hit the wealthy up with even more taxes, which forced them to sell off even more land. Even Highclere Castle, which in its best position, had over 25,000 acres attached to it, and they now have less than 6 because they have to sell it off because they don't have the people or the manpower to work all that land. Oh, sorry, 6,000. Those young men and women who were in domestic service, like I said, get a life. The ladies especially, they find they can now get married and have their own families. And they can move out of the city because in that post-war rebound, they start building all kinds of neat little semi-detached cottages outside of the cities, and they can get their own place to live in. Well, all of this is going to change life for the wealthy in ways they could never have expected. And it changes life for those former workers as well. Some of you may have looked through magazines from the 40s and the 50s, and you've seen all those wonderful young housewives advertising the latest in technology, right? The vacuum cleaner, washing machines, toasters, blenders, you name it. Those same ads appear in British magazines, but they're not so much targeting young wives as they are designed to target young girls to lure them back into domestic service. But, you know, it's a bribe. If you come work for me, I will buy you this beautiful vacuum cleaner to make your life so much simpler. But it doesn't work. Because by the early 30s, less than 1% of families in England and Scotland, less than 1% have domestic staff that live with them. Just 30 years earlier, 40% of all working women worked in someone's home and lived there. This is a huge change. And as I said, this is why the show has to end when it does. Well, besides the fact that Maggie Smith said the only thing she could see open to the Dowager was dying, and that would be no fun. So she wanted to go out when things were still on an upswing. If the show was going to remain faithful to history, this is what the future held for the folks at Downton Abbey. This would have made for sad TV, because the staff would have gone. They would have been selling off property. They would have been the ones holding estate sales. Fortunately for us and for the country, the British Crown puts a huge value and a great deal of importance on protecting its heritage. And so as families start to sell off their estates, in many cases the Crown steps in and purchases the estates. This was the beginnings of the British National Trust. They believed, because of the age of these properties and because of their extensive history and the contents, the collections that they held, those things should be treated as national treasures and kept so that everyone could appreciate them. Those that did not get purchased by the Crown or did not get purchased by outsiders who always wanted to have a country house might find them dismantled. Because if you take the roof off of a house, you don't have to pay taxes on it. So that's why you see so many ruined estates around the countryside. I don't know which is worse, a slow, painful death by tax forfeit, or pulling the roof off and watching it decay right in front of your eyes. Either way, it was a good time for the show to end. And I'm going to leave you with this. My favorite rule, because I think it really sums everything up. Never gossip about the affairs of the family you belong to, for that is treachery and creates mischief. Keep their secrets, but none of your own. So that then begs the question, would Anna have helped Mary carry the dead body out of her bedroom? What do you think? Yes, absolutely. Because your status is tied to your family's status. So you don't want anything to happen to your family that is going to reduce them in status, because then you too suffer. So you keep their secrets and you move dead bodies. What about Tom and Sybil? Why would that have never happened?
Well, she couldn't have married the valet,
Well, no, he's the chauffeur. Tom the chauffeur and Lady Sybil, okay? They would never have married for a variety of reasons, right? First reason, you don't talk to the boss's daughter, right? Status issue, don't go there. What's Tom's nationality?
Irish.
And the Earl's family?
English.
And what church do they go to? They're Protestant. And if you're Catholic, you are probably, if you're Irish, you're probably Catholic. English people did not trust Catholic people of any sort, and they especially do not trust Irishmen. How he ever ends up at the chauffeur, that is a whole nother discussion. So Sybil they say, yeah, go ahead, so she marries him and they leave. When Sybil dies in America, would Tom have come home with the baby and been welcomed with open arms?
No.
No, she would have been disinherited. Oh, But speaking of babies, how about Edith and her illegitimate child?
Go on, Ernie.
Would she have ended up with the child living at the tenant farmer's house?
No.
Would the child have ended up in the nursery in the big house?
No.
Would she have introduced her fiance on their wedding night or the night before their wedding to said illegitimate child?
No.
If you found yourself pregnant and unmarried and you were of a family of status, you would confide in a female relative, usually an auntie. Sometimes a grandma, but usually the auntie. And the auntie would suggest to mom and dad that she take you and go do the grand tour. We're going to go to the continent. And while we're there, we're going to find a lovely little secluded place where you can sit around and have this baby, and we will arrange with the minister to have it placed in a good home. And then you and I will get back in our carriage and or car, and we are going to go home, and everybody will ask how your trip was and how you liked the things, and you'll go right along with it, and it will never be spoken of again.
Didn't happen.
Didn't happen. You got recycled. Can you think of other things that happened in the series that left you going, really?
The servants getting married.
The servants getting married. What do you think? Yes or no?
They weren't allowed to fraternize,
Weren't allowed to fraternize.
same status.
But they do, right? Bates and Anna are always hanging out together.
Right.
No, that would never have happened if they had decided, through however they managed to pull this off, that they're going to get married. Anna would have been dismissed on the spot, which also then answers the question, would Anna have worked while she was pregnant? No, because she wouldn't be there in the first place. The belief was, and it was a very popular belief clear up until the first part of the 21st century, you cannot be loyal to both your spouse and your employer. And this was believed to be especially true for women. So, if you choose to get married, that's fine, you go for it, but you're gone. But if your husband works in the big house, what kind of a marriage are you going to have? He can't come see you in his time off. He has no time off, and you don't live with him. So he's going to have to go too. What about, how should I put this? What about Barrow's sexual orientation?
Oh, that
Yeah, no, that was illegal. If anyone had the least bit idea that you were so inclined, as soon as they saw something that said, yes, you do, the constable would have shown up at the door and he would have been arrested as soon as he walked outside. Now, mind you, they would have tried to do it as discreetly as possible because, again, you don't want that on the family because that could color their reputation. Anything else? Yes?
The servants were dancing with the owners of the estate at one of the parties.
There are occasions where the family did intermix with the staff. Even Queen Elizabeth and Queen Victoria did that. Usually at Christmas, they would have a party for the staff. And they do have days where they change roles in England, one day a year, where the master becomes the servant becomes the master. So there were occasions where that might happen. They might even go to your wedding if you had that kind of a relationship. It would be seen as a great bonus to the servant getting married that the master had, decided to lower himself to come to your event. How often it happened? Who knows? But it did. It just wouldn't be terribly common.
Why did they put all those things in the Downton Abbey story that were taboo, just to make a good story?
Absolutely. Because if all of this was Downton Abbey, would you watch it for 6 seasons? You'd be lucky if you'd make it through 3 episodes, right? So if you don't have drama and trauma and sensationalism, nobody's going to watch.
That's true, because we all want to know what was going to happen next.
Exactly. And if it was dull and boring, who cares? But you raise a good point. What did you say about the murder?
The murder when Bates
Bates is accused of murder.
then Anna was accused.
Right?
Yeah.
No, not going to stay in the house. As soon as that even came up, they would have been out the door. I mean, there were so many opportunities where Anna and or Bates would have found themselves unemployed. It's not even funny.
They were even given a cottage to live.
They were even given a cottage to live in. No. How about the maid whose name I can't remember, teaches herself to type, goes out and gets a job as a clerk, and marries a guy with standing? I don't know when she was going to learn to type because she has no free time. She's working 17 hours a day. Yeah, probably not.
How
Did
she
they
had
make
time to
it
go
for
to
an American
classes for
audience?
that, huh? I never thought.
I don't believe that was their original intent because this originally aired a year earlier in England before it started here. I think it was aired, or I think it was created the way it was because we've reached a point in society where sensationalism is one of the most important ingredients, and we want to be entertained. We don't want to be educated.
So they took what was real in England, but just updated it.
They took what was real and in England and made it Hollywood.
I think they were very surprised at how it took off in America. I've seen interviews and they seem to be very surprised at how.
They don't realize, I think they know it, but I don't think they understand the American fascination with the social order in Britain. Because I think, as in this country, where we're class-based and we don't know and understand how their social order works, I think the flip is also true. They see themselves in this very rigid social order, which has changed over the years. I mean, it's become much more fluid, but because they don't have a class structure like we do, they don't understand that their lifestyle is so different from what it is in America. I mean, I can remember, it's not so much now, but I can remember 30 years ago, there was this idea in Europe that, you know, all Americans were rich, that we all drove fancy cars and we all lived in big houses because America was the land of opportunity. Well, they know that's not necessarily the case now. But yeah, they were really surprised that we got into it as much as we did.
Either Japan or China actually opened up a butler school after that became very popular.
I am not surprised that that is the case. I mean, there are butler schools in different places in Europe, in London. There are nanny schools. I mean, this is where where Will and Kate's nanny came from. She went to the nanny school. And those jobs are still very prestigious positions. So if you've got a hankering to work in a big house, go learn to be a butler.
Probably paid a little better now than they were then.
I would hope so. But I don't remember from the interviews with the Carnarvons or their butler whether or not he said he lives on site. That I do not know. And I know they have a French chef or an English chef who does French cooking, one or the other. But their core staff is relatively small in comparison. I would hope that they're better paid. Yes, ma'am.
Where did you do most of your research?
on both sides of the pond. The wonderful thing about modern computer technology is that so many things have been digitized that you can access the archives of museums around the world now from the comfort of your sofa. And so you don't have to go and do your research. But nothing quite replaces the experience, as these ladies found. Nothing quite replaces the experience of going to the house or going to the place that you're researching and being able to walk around in that space and put yourself in their shoes. And that's true, I think, on a variety of different levels, whether it's a television show or a famous person or the site of a major important event. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind, for example, is it's one thing to talk about the Holocaust. It's a whole nother thing to go to Auschwitz, right? It's one thing to teach about the Civil War. It's another thing to stand in the middle of a battlefield at Gettysburg. And it's the same way with built structures. It's one thing to read about the signers of the Declaration sitting in Constitution Hall. It's a whole nother thing to stand there and realize what happened in that space. Or go to a church and sit there and know that not only have kings sat in these pews, but that evangelists have come from there, whether it's George Whitefield or the Wesley brothers. It gives you a very different perspective on those events or those people or places that you're studying when you physically put yourself in those places. I highly recommend it.
Have you been there?
To Highclere?
No, to Downton Abbey.
Yeah, to Highclere, no, I haven't. I have not found myself in that place yet. When I was living over there, pardon?
Do you have a
Oh yeah, I love architecture and I love houses in general. And so any opportunity to tour historic homes, I'm your girl. Yes, ma'am.
When we were there, it was quite interesting because like the main housekeeper was with our tour group, and she said during the filming, they're only allowed to touch
certain things. Mm-hmm.
Like the drapes cannot be touched or anything like that. And she would hide off camera to make sure that everything was supposed to be
as what, right?
And we were surprised at like the rugs, how ratty looking they were, and the red furniture, red velvet furniture was horrible
There were
looking.
holes in it and everything.
Yeah,
It
but
was just not in real good repair.
You didn't look at, you don't see that on camera.
No, you really don't. And I remember the first interview I saw with Lord Carnarvon, which was right after the series started, and they were all kind of freaking out that Americans were just going nuts over this.
They're stinking happy about it though.
Oh, I know that. Well, and they should be. And I mean, I would be too, because at that point, I mean, they were not even a year into the series in this country. So that would have been 2010? Does that sound about right? 7 years? Yeah. Okay. So at that point, his estimate was 11 to $14 million just to make repairs. That's not to do restorations or renovations, just to repair the house.
You mean,
So
the
that could be
company
used-
that made Downton Abbey, made the series, did the repair?
No. The owners, the family who owns Highclere Castle, where Downton Abbey is filmed, said that they needed between 11 and $13 million to make repairs to their house. So the income generated by the series is going a long way towards doing those repairs, and at some point, hopefully, will evolve into restoration work, because they have They have rooms where the plaster is falling off the walls, where the leaks are just unbelievable. So this is a place that needs serious TLC.
I see an interview on
restoration
TV.
when
That's not even the restoration, that's just to stabilize the house.
All the chandeliers and the lamps that we saw were candles, which I suppose have been electrified by now. Were they?
I don't know, what did you see? They are electrified?
Well, they
They
had
had-
electricity
Oh, yeah.
to the.
Yeah.
But they were always lighting candles, and they were always dripping, and they always had to replace the candles.
Oh, yeah, you would.
Person's job.
That's exactly right. I mean, that's one of the biggest purchases you'd have under household expenses would be candles and lamp oil before electricity.
One of your first pictures of Highclere Castle, you show the front and then kind of round to the back side.
Oh, that aerial picture?
Yes. The back side was originally the front door.
Correct.
And back there, it's really cool because it's all brick, it's all dark brick. But back there is the restaurant, and then they have the gift shop that was packed with people.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, so they're making
Oh,
quite a
And
bit
you
of
have to
money.
realize that none of the kitchen scenes were filmed there.
That's correct. That's correct. Those are filmed on a film lot.
The kitchen looked a little similar to it, and then they also had a display down below of all the King Tut.
Oh, that's right, because Lord Carnarvon's great-grandfather was one of the supporters of Carter and his Egyptian expedition. And they found all kinds of cool stuff hidden in a secret compartment between the rooms, the secret closet there. Yeah, so the family has a really interesting history. Lady Carnarvon has written 2 books, and I don't know if you have them in the library, Robin, or not. She wrote about her husband's grandmother and great-grandmother. His great-grandmother was the illegitimate daughter of the Rothschilds. This is one of those deals where I need cash, you want a title, let's talk. And he clearly doted on his daughter because when he married her off, she came with a huge fortune. She is an amazingly interesting woman, and so was her daughter, Catherine. And so the second book is about her daughter, and if you haven't read them, I highly recommend. And if you just Google Lady Carnarvon and the castle, I'm guessing you'll get the books will come up. They're not big books, they're quick reads, but they're really good.
There are areas in the Cotswolds where the church is at and where they filmed, what was her name? Matthew's mother.
Mary or
Mrs. Crowley.
yeah,
right?
Mrs. Crowley's.
Her house.
Yeah.
And so we got to see a lot of that.
Oh, very cool. I love the Cotswolds. That's where like the most thatched roof cottages are.
Yep, and it's
We're
beautiful.
going back
We're
in
going
May.
back. Yeah.
I'm so jealous.
Now, they filmed, all the bedrooms were the same bedroom, right?
No,
No.
no.
No, there are multiples.
There's
Somewhere
a
I read that, but they
no.
just
There was a
changed
row
it.
of like
Okay.
L-shaped hallway we got to go through.
They
So what
did
you-
use individual.
Yeah, so
Okay.
what you see is that front door that has that weird looking handle on it. If you go up the stairs, that front part there are all the bedrooms that they used.
Okay.
That all along that top side.
Well, somewhere I had read that they just used the same room for each bedroom.
Yeah, that would be really tough. That would be,
And the people that actually worked there were the ones that had to move in everything.
yes.
If they wanted something moved, the film people could not touch it. It had to be the people that were living there. I remember when we were there, we were in the library area, and I looked specifically on a bookshelf and saw there were 3 black books and then a shorter book, and I measured where the shelf was at, so I watched for it every time when they were showing the show.
Very cool.
Kind of cool to see that same thing. Truly, we loved Inverary Castle in Scotland. Was phenomenal. That was really beautiful.
There are so many amazing structures in Great Britain. I mean, just breathtaking places. you have to make multiple trips because there is no way you can see them all. You just can't. And really enjoy it. I mean, you have to invest time in each of these places when you go. I mean, you can take a day just to go through a house, and a day just to do the grounds, and a day to do the village that happens to be closest by. There's so much eye candy that, yeah, you spend a lot of time just kind of.
Even like the bridges in Inverary. There's this little tiny road that goes by there, and there's a bridge that has instead of just a regular bridge, it has a round circle for the water to go through. And it was just so cool to be standing on the grounds and look over and see this bridge and this beautiful lake beyond it. It was just breathtaking.
It really is. Scotland's gorgeous, and the best time to go to Scotland is August and September. Those are the 2 warmest months, and it's when all the heather is blooming. Otherwise, it rains, and it rains, and it drizzle, just cold, wet, drizzly stuff.
This countryside then wasn't affected that much by World War II?
No, the bombings that took place in World War II targeted primarily commercial districts. So southern England was hit hard because that's where the shipyards are, where London is, and then they worked their way up the coast. York was bombed. I don't remember if Edinburgh was or not.
No, Edinburgh wasn't, but Glasgow.
Glasgow was, because it's a manufacturing center, so is Birmingham. And so they didn't really do anything to the countryside.
The children, a lot of children were brought.
Were sent out to the country estates. Yes. And great-grandfather, Lady Carnarvon, his wife, did run a hospital at Highclere at World War I. So those kinds of things, yeah, they pop up in the series, and they really did happen. But you should go. You should put it on your bucket list, and you should just go.
The cool thing, though, is that, looking at, do you remember in the dining room, that big picture that was at the end? That is actually there, and it belongs to the family, and that's what I think is cool. You think about, think if you look at that, oh, that's just a prop.
Right, but no, it's the real deal. Yes.
It's their family. It's their lineage going. It was just, that part of it was cool because that's the history.
Exactly. Do you know why they called it Downton Abbey?
No, I guess I never heard that.
Okay, because there are a lot of estates that have the name Abbey in it in England for real. And it's because many of these country estates started out as monasteries or convents, abbeys. And they built the homes around them. So the Great Hall at Highclere, that is the original structure. It was originally part of a monastery. And it evolved into a house. But I mean, that was hundreds of years ago. That's the other thing that's hard for us to wrap our heads around. I mean, we're talking about houses that might be 200, 400, 600, 900 years old. Exactly. Yeah, we don't have that. We have throwaway history here. Yes, ma'am.
Well, this style of living must have been very high in American standard. Perhaps you know we have a militia mansion here, and from the late 1800s, and my mother was the housekeeper and cook.
Oh, wow.
1920s.
Okay.
And she was expected to do everything. She had a tiny little room, a garret room up in the attic, and she could only use the back stairway.
Correct.
Although she cleaned the front stairway, and the fixtures and things that were there at that time are still there.
Wow.
And they have had open houses and.
So is this a private residence now?
Yes.
I'll have to find out. Well, I'll have to find out when they're open and make a trip back to see this.
It was originally just a great big house, and when the Higgins moved here and bought railroad land, they put the columns on to make it look Greek.
Yes.
Architecture, and then added the playroom and things.
Well, that's it, because if you're a person if you have come up in the world, especially in this country, because we're talking primarily new money, you want to have that old world feel because that gives you status. And in a class system, anything that you can do to set yourself apart from everybody else in that group is important to maintain your status.
There's still a hand-painted mural in the dining room.
Oh,
It was there from the 1900s.
oh wow, yeah, I got to see this place. Listen,
They've been open a couple times for tour of homes at Christmas time.
well, I'm going to have to coordinate my next trip out here to see you guys when that's the case. I live on the east side of Cedar Rapids, so I don't often get over here this way, except for fun things like this. Ladies and gentlemen, I have gone way over my time here. We're now 10 minutes after 8, and my goal is always to stay less than 90 minutes. So if you need to leave, please feel free. If you want to stay and talk and ask questions, I am happy to do so as long as you want, or until Robin throws us out, whichever comes first. But I don't want you to feel like you have to stay just because we're all chatting.
Well, this is most.
Have you ever seen the Biltmore Estate?
I have been to Biltmore.
That to me was about as American of the old money that you can get, because I cannot believe, you know, when I watched Downton Abbey, and I don't know if that's how it was, but they were very reluctant to do the indoor water, indoor lighting and
Right.
stuff. Where the Biltmore Estate, when they built that, they had an intercom system before we ever had.
Right, but that's the difference between old money and new money. New money in this country was all about demonstrating their status by including modern technological developments. Elevators in this country, in estates, right? Indoor plumbing, electricity, intercom systems, you name it, came into big houses in this country way before they went into most of the country estates in Europe, because one of the key things about those people with status is that they are very much tradition and tradition based, and anything that threatens to disrupt that tradition is looked at with fear and loathing. In this country, on the other hand, just because of the nature of who America is, it's all about including those new things as quickly as they become available. All you have to do is look at a cell phone to see what that means, right? There are people out there who, as soon as the latest and greatest cell phone hits the market, they are buying a new one. It doesn't matter if they've had it 6 months or less. We just do that. But like I said, we have a very disposable attitude about our past because we're so young by comparison. Yes.
When we were in Austria in the late 70s, or 1979 or so. Anyway, we were in like 16th century homes and, and palaces and stuff. And they were going to tear down our 75-year-old courthouse. That was kind of the talk at that time. But there's nothing in this country older than about 250 years now.
Unless you go to the East Coast, right? If you go to the original colonies, there are still quite a few homes and structures that are, 300 years old. They're few and far between. Because we started out so small and we have this huge continent to expand across, it created this sense of new is better. Everything we did was new. So doing it again and doing it even bigger and better is obviously better. And this attitude of tearing everything down breaks my heart. I mean, in Beltrami County, which is where Bemidji is located, northern Minnesota didn't get settled until pretty much the turn of the 19th into the 20th century. So when I was living up north, a lot of the places had not even been there for 100 years. Bemidji was kind of the exception because it was a lumbering district, and so it had been settled after the war, Civil War. By the time I got to college there, we had 5 Victorian homes left in a city that was about 25,000 people. and the courthouse had been long gone. For that reason, they hadn't been there that long, 75 years. Oh, what the heck, we're going to tear it down and build something new and modern. In Europe, you will never find that. I mean, when I was going to school, I did part of my undergraduate at Oxford too. And so, you know, the highlight of my time there was to find the oldest pub in town. And I had an American friend who was also doing studies there. And we decided we were going to learn history by osmosis. And we would go to the oldest pubs we could find, and we would sit there and have a pint. And the one that was closest to my college had been in operation for 900 years. I mean, think about that. And the back of the courtyard of said pub was one of the last remnants of the medieval city wall. And so we would go sit out there, and you would just sit there and think about the fact that this was a 900-year-old pub. It had always been a pub. Always. 900 years. We can't wrap our heads around that in this country because it's so foreign to everything that is America. Mm-hmm. I worked with an archaeologist from Dublin in this country years ago on a project, and we're all meticulously doing our work, and somebody happened to look over, and he's just whipping things out of the ground and tossing things as fast as he could. And our crew chief just was so surprised he didn't react at first, and he went over and grabbed him and, "What are you doing?" And he says, "Well, I'm going to get down to the good stuff." And the crew chief said, "No, you don't understand. This is the good stuff." He was used to busting through the Victorian era, the 18th century era, and going all the way down to the Romans and the Viking eras, because that was the good stuff. He did not even understand that in this country, that doesn't work that way. We're not digging through centuries of occupation. And so they have the same kind of problem in, like I said, in reverse. But you should all go. Put it on your bucket list. If you haven't been, go to Europe. Go to England if you don't go anywhere else. Thanks, everybody. I am glad you enjoyed it. Well, obviously I didn't bore you too bad because you all stayed way past time.
Should we get her to come back?
Yes.
I think so too. She's got a whole slew of historical talks that she does. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night. Drive safely.
Thanks for coming. That was great.